Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Arndt, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. With me, as usual, are the good doctors, Bobby Fleshman and Allison McCoy. And today's episode can be a little different. A few days ago, I came over to McFleshmans. You guys were sitting in the beer garden. Bobby had a gigantic shit-eating grin on his face because he had just gotten a brand new toy. So, Allison, why don't you explain to everybody what you got Bobby and why?
Well, that's a good question. When we first opened the brewery about, forever ago now, he kept saying, you know what we really need is a side pull. It would make the Helles Lager and the Czech Pilsner so good. And I was like, what's a side pull? And he's like, well, it's like a $400 beer faucet, which is what we call the taps on this side of the bar. And I was like, no, under no circumstances are we paying $400 for a tap. And so every year he just kept saying, hey, you know, it'd be really great if you bought me a side pull. So finally, after our successful Mile of Music, I decided, you know what? I think it's finally time that the successful brewer gets something that he wants. But of course, I don't just go and buy one side pull. I buy two that are connected to the fanciest large, what would you call that?
Tower?
Bronze tower, brass tower.
It looks like a small fire hydrant.
And it even has a cute little hop cone at the top. We splurged. So I go to our main brewer, Eric Rodier, nicknamed Cooler. And I was like, Cooler, how do I buy a side pull faucet? And he was like, well, this is what you have to think about. And then when we actually went to the catalog and saw that sexy beast of a tower with two taps, we were both smitten and we couldn't unsee it. So
I think the finial on top alone weighs
it's a little hop cone.
2 or 3 pounds.
Yeah. And the whole thing's like 30 or 40 pounds.
So this is a company out of the Czech Republic
Yes.
that just specializes in beer faucets.
LukrFaucets.com, I believe is what
We're going to get into a commercial here, it sounds like. But they taped their box up with tape that said their name over and over and over. And they're only known for making faucets for beer. So it's Lukr. So thus ends the ad, I guess.
No, yeah, and they're really pretty. And you get fancy ones. I mean, we got the fancy ones, but you can get like modern looking ones and like classic ones. It's very exciting. So, Bobby, why are you so obsessed with the side pull? And why the hell did I spend so much money on side pulls?
Context. We have a brewing system that was installed in Seoul, South Korea. And the people that installed it had visited the Czech Republic and fell in love with the beers and the equipment and the entire beer culture. And they went back. I know I said this in a previous podcast, but they went back to Seoul and built a replica of the castle with the clock tower or the astronomical symbols. I think Gary was talking about that a little bit too. They built a miniature replica of Castle Prague in the middle of Seoul. And then they had the system we have commissioned and built and installed in the same castle or restaurant. So we've had a sort of from the very beginning a connection to Czech style beers. And the thing that we've been missing, I think, is the pour. We've had the ingredients and the process and the equipment down, but at the very last stage, we haven't done the Czech Pilsner justice. So what they do in the Czech Republic is they order beer with varying levels of foam, and the foam has a certain character or a certain integrity to it. It's more stable than anything you would see, most things you would see in the United States from what we call Pilsner. And that's because of the hops and all the way that they do their malting and their brewing. But they needed a way to get a repeatable level of foam per the customer's request. And so they invented these side pull faucets that we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm reading from punchdrink.com. Ladinka, or the quote standard pour, is closest to a regular keg pour, mostly beer, but with about 3 fingers of foam, leaving a thick, flavorsome head with a cleaner, smoother beer underneath. The snite, or cut, I'm assuming I'm saying these right, is about 2/3 wet foam, while the mliko is a full mug of rich wet foam resembling a glass of frothy milk.
And it translates to milk.
And so it's designed to be enjoyed quickly before its creamy, melt-in-the-mouth texture dissipates. So basically, you pay half price and you get an entire glass full of foam, and you just inhale the foam, but
you do drink
suck
it quickly.
down the foam quickly.
Yeah, it's a dessert.
And it's the beautiful, wet, and creamy Lukr microfoam not only protects your beer from oxidation throughout the drinking experience, it also enhances the aroma and flavor compounds in the beer. So we are going to put this to the test.
We're going to put our beer staff to the test. They're going to love us. And there's a little bit of facetiousness overlaying that statement. They are going to have to add to their stable of knowing how to pour like 3 more pours. And knowing how to use this handle is going to take some time.
But we've done experiments to where we've poured beers in different, there goes the phone, where we pour beers in different glassware, or we pour beers out of the can versus on tap and blindfold folks and do a completely blind tasting. And I'm very curious to see if you, good sir, I'm pointing to Bobby Fleshman, can pick out the difference between the Lukr Faucet Czech Pilsner that we make and the non-Lukr Faucet Czech.
Yeah, there's another version of this that
I mean, I'm going to believe that it's true because it's too expensive and too shiny not to be amazing.
Well, remember, this is a culture that drinks as much as Wisconsin across the entire nation. The Czech Republic is. So they have definitely put it through its paces, and the beers that they drink are not American light lager. So they drink these Pilsners by the tens of gallons per year. So
I do have a question though. Because Gary and I were chatting before the podcast started, and he was talking about the presentations of wines and things. And so, Gary, you've been at our tap room many times. Does the presentation add to your experience, or like what? And I mean, of all the places you've traveled, also.
Yeah, I think it. You're going to a place like this not just for the beer, but also for the experience. And as weird as it may sound, having something like this, especially if the people that are serving the beer can explain it to people,
That's true.
that this just isn't pretty.
Right.
This isn't designed to be an ornament.
Right.
But this actually does something.
We joke that someone may say, "I'll have a Stella," and when they walk in, because it does look a little bit like the Stella towers that are mounted on bars everywhere.
You mean of the Lukr faucets?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
the Lukr. Yeah.
Well, and reading a little deeper, one more sentence. So the Lukr's goal, they were created in the 1990s. So it's a semi-recent addition to the history of beer. Lukr's goal was to improve the functionality of traditional Czech side pour taps, a feat the creators accomplished with a patented combination of a ball valve, a compensator, which regulates the flow of beer, and a strainer, which work together to produce the dense, wet foam the Czech bars are famous for serving. Right. So there's some science. There's quite a bit of science behind these particular type of Lukr faucets, and I think there's a couple other side pulls on the market. But the patented aspect of the little, we of course immediately took it apart and we're looking at the little flow rate valve thing inside, and I think it's going to prove itself worth every penny.
Yeah, they brought together multiple ideas into one faucet. You've seen these in different applications, but they brought it all together in one, and therefore the patent.
And because I've learned so much in marketing now after owning the brewery, they're so smart to make it so shiny and pretty.
Oh yeah, and they're smart to do one thing and do it well. They're not making tires, and they're not even making other things in beer. They're just making faucets.
They also make T-shirts that say Lukr, 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 Lukr.
I know you guys are the ones I can do this with. Let's nerd out then into talking about pouring beer.
Right.
One of my first questions I had for you guys when I saw this is, why can't you do this with your current taps?
Right.
Current tap, you have your plastic, whatever thing on it, you pull it forward, beer comes out. What is so different about this than the tap you're going to find at a normal bar?
Well, like she was saying, it's a patented ball valve, and that's probably oversimplifying what's happening. And a ball valve is literally a ball with a hole in it, a steel ball with a hole through the middle. So if it's pulled all the way open, it presents no restriction to the flow. And then at the varying angles between that and sideways, you get more and more flow, which sounds trivial. And you ask yourself, why don't the other taps do the same thing? Well, it just comes down to you get better functionality out of what we call, I forget, Perlick faucets, I think, are what we use in the United States for the most part. If you just have on or off, and in the middle, in the intermediate, it's pretty perilous. If anyone's never poured beer before, they'll think to themselves, I'm going to pull it halfway, and all they do is fill the glass entirely with foam. It's uncontrollable.
I'm going to jump in now.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as when you have a a water hose, and you put your thumb over the water hose. You can control kind of the amount that you spray the person next to you.
Yeah.
And so if you think of the Lukr faucet, really has 2 thumbs instead of just one. And so you can control the flow of the first one, and then the second one, the beer tender is actually controlling via the side pull part.
Yeah, it has the intention of being able to operate in those intermediate angles. But you're talking about the first restrictor that's a flow control upstream is sort of a continuous restrictor. It's hard to describe it without a picture, but it basically allows it to gradually go from one pressure to the next. It's not an abrupt jump from where the keg is held to where the faucet is held. So that's a pretty complicated design, but it's essentially like a how do you call it, a pendulum or something that goes inside, and you pull it out, and just by pulling it out a few millimeters, you can increase the flow without causing an abrupt transition.
Now, this is happening at the taps. I mean,
Rotameter is what I was trying to think of.
Oh, that everyone knows what that
means.
means.
It's just shaped like think of an.
It looks like a plastic thimble.
Yeah, that's pretty good explanation. Yeah.
So that is the beer once it hits the taps. Then the pressure associated with that, then the beer tender can control. But we haven't even talked about the pressure on the other side. I mean, one of the reasons that you'll go to a
well, before we go to the other side, that you've talked about the two so-called thumbs that we're using to control that flow more than we do so on the American faucets. You have that last piece that they talk about, the strainer at the end in the faucet head, and that's what that's really doing is increasing the surface area as the beer goes through and allowing it to aerate on the spot. So in every other instance, so it's going through all this screen, right, and it's just getting completely turbulent, and it's causing that air to get intertwined with that beer as it hits the glass. And we don't want air near beer ever until that very last second. It's not going to go stale in the 6 minutes it takes to drink the pint. 6 minutes, maybe 30. It just depends on who you are. But it's not going to go stale in that amount of time.
Would you say that part's the same as the sparkler that we have on the beer engines?
It's a lot like that, or the diffuser plate on the nitro faucets. They're all trying to accomplish something similar in that regard. That's true.
If you see a beer engine, there's like this little black and or blue, depending on the brand, tip that goes on
like
the long.
a dozen holes around it.
And if we've just tapped a firkin, we don't put those things on because it's as bubbly as it needs to be without the help of the little sparkler.
And I want to say, if you go to London, like if you go to the south of England, that they go without sparklers.
Okay.
Yeah, because they want their glasses filled to the brim. So it's funny. We have this vision of what so-called cask ale should be and look like, but that really only kicks in when you get up to like Yorkshire and Leeds latitude.
Interesting.
So yeah, there's a.
What is the sparkler?
Oh, the sparkler is that plastic gizmo that's on the end of the faucet from our beer engines. So you'll thrust the beer through it, and there's these teeny little holes.
Well, and the way that you pour it, so you pull the big handle, so you pull it back. And the tip of the spout is not touching the bottom of the glass. You actually want to hold it up a little bit, and it creates this layer of foam. And then you stick the spout down underneath that foam, and then you fill from the bottom up.
And as the beer tenders have learned over time, you can control the ultimate amount of foam on that glass by how long you pour above before you insert the tip below. And the funny thing is, people, when they see that for the first time, they think, oh my God, they're putting the faucet in the beer. And that's a big no-no in bars. You never want to see a faucet go in a beer. Well, you got to keep your faucets clean. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. You don't want to do that because a lot of these bars won't clean their faucets. They won't rinse them out at night.
We just don't talk about that.
So the point being is that when people see that, they know that there's beer from last week making it into their glass and all the bugs and things that go along with it. That's kind of a tangent, but we rinse our faucets out often, every night, every day, and probably throughout the shift 3 or 4 times. But in order to accomplish this in the English beers, to get the foam level the right amount, and also with these new Czech beer, this Czech pour that we're talking about today, we have to do the same thing. We have to insert that tip below the surface of the foam, and it'll cascade out into the appropriate level depending on which pour is ordered. So I myself have very little, if any, experience pouring with these faucets.
Oh yeah, we have no idea what we're doing. It's going to be great.
This has just been like a dream. So I'm talking about this just from an academic perspective.
Yeah, we've just read the papers and seen the videos of it, but we were convinced.
Mm-hmm. Now, Allison wants to talk about the other side of the wall, right?
Well, yeah. So we obsess. I mean, we can tell you, well, I can't, he can. That's why I keep you around. The names of the different pieces of these different types of taps that give you the experience on this side of the bar, but on the other side, you had to take how many draft line pressure courses did you take?
Well, let me say this. If someone happens to be listening to this who works in a bar or ever will, just put this in their back pocket, that if you're having issues with beer foaming up, do not go back there and touch the pressure dials ever. It's the new person's inclination that if you're getting a lot of foam, then they think there must be too much carbonation. And so what they do is they go back and they turn the dials down. And what that does, Allison can talk about this.
Henry's Law.
Yeah, Henry's Law tells the beer how much of that CO2 will be in solution for any given temperature and pressure, depending on what kind of liquid we're talking about. In this case, beer. They'll turn the dial back, and when that happens, the CO2 starts to escape. The liquid is not stable now.
Beer turns flat.
Well, but it wants to come out in the faucet because now it's in atmosphere, and it was already unstable. It was already trying to escape. So now you've exacerbated it. So they go back and they turn it down some more. So and so on and so on. So that's the thing I would recommend is, if anything, counterintuitively, if you're alone and you really are having some problems in the bar, you might actually first want to check your cooler temperature. That's number one. If your temperature is what it has always been, then your next step is check your CO2. And if your bottle's empty, switch that, obviously. But then add pressure. If it's foaming, add pressure.
We have gone down the rabbit hole. I was just going to say that there's a lot of technical knowledge about getting all of those lines properly balanced, but you're giving people the 101 of what not to do, which is lovely.
Well, how much more do you want to go down that path?
Oh, it's fine.
But delivering, I think the overarching...
There's obsession of pressures on each side.
You can't accomplish the perfect pour unless... This is where we could break this into 20 different episodes because it starts...
We promise.
It starts with grain selection, and it goes through production or brewing methods, and then it goes through all the things we do in what we call the cellar to get it ready to package and deliver to the consumer. Even if we're the consumer, we got to get that beer in the right state so that it could be poured perfectly. What happens after I deliver it, I have no idea. But here we know how to do. We know we do have ideas. So we do obsess about delivering the perfect pint. So yeah, how many rabbit holes should we go down?
That's fine.
I did have a question. You've been talking about foam.
Mm-hmm.
I would go so far as to say that most Americans are not fans of foam, or at least they are not familiar with foam. That if you get a lot of foam in your beer, you'd probably say that is a bad pour of beer. They want beer, not foam.
They're frugal.
So how does one sell foam?
Right. I think they're frugal. I think we've seen 30 packs of Keystone go for $15 and less. And I think that just speaks to a means to an end. People want beer.
I'd like to challenge you now. I'm going to go get you a 30 pack of Stones and see if you can actually pour them. Like, see how much foam you can
No,
get
you can't. That's the other thing. They're not designed for foam. So there's all these things.
Put it through the Lukr faucet and then see what happens.
I mean, it'll happen, but it'll drop out quickly. Now, I will say Miller Lite is the exception to that rule. I
think this goes back to the presentation. Here I was asking, Gary's like, does presentation really matter? And of course, I believe it matters. I mean, I wouldn't obsess about all of these things if I didn't think it mattered. But when, myself included, with our beer tenders, like when we do a good pour, we celebrate it. And I think part of it is in the selling and the marketing, at least here, that a good pour is going to have foam on top. And we also celebrate the lacing. So that's a clean glass after it's been drank. You're going to have the rings of the foam.
And I've said before, you can tell how fast someone's drinking or how big their
you can tell a lot about a person by the lacing.
The layers are 2 inches apart. They've had a long day. They're trying to get to the bottom of that glass.
When that happens, it's usually with a stout. That's when I see people like take out their cameras and they'll take a picture.
I don't know. Hildy can do that too.
But I've not like
Tall Mass does it. Our English IPA does it, but nothing as well as the stout.
The Nitro, the Public House Pint, as well as the Tall Mass English IPA,
and
those are both cask /nitros.
I won't go into the rabbit hole too far, but I will say nitrogen does not like to go into beer, and therefore once you have a nitrogen bubble, it will not do what's called coalesce with its into bigger bubbles and go away. So you have little tight Guinness foam. You'll always have it.
Cask and nitros do have better head retention. They last longer.
Yeah, the nitrogen doesn't want out. Now with cask, it's kind of a cheat. Actually, it's the other way around. Nitrogen is the cheat to simulate cask. And if you go chronologically.
But you were talking about them selling beer in the Czech Republic that's like half foam, like a cheaper beer.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm a bit suspicious that anybody is going to order that.
I am
here.
too.
You mean?
Yes.
That's why we are doing a major push to educate everyone on the Lukr faucet.
If I will say I would say if anyone can pull it off, we're one of the few that could do it because we've sort of built this community that does understand the different taps and the different kinds of pours and styles that we do here. It would be very difficult to have this at Lambeau. I just can't imagine anything like this ever happening.
Okay, I'm now showing Gary a picture of it where it literally, it's like a shot of beer at the bottom of a 16-ounce glass with foam on top.
But they're only paying half for it, right? So it's not going to be about money so much. They're buying a different experience. They're not spending any more money for the liquid they're consuming.
I mean, I'll eat cake batter too. That sounds good. I mean, that is essentially what it looks like. It's just foamy milk froth.
And at the end of the day,
although don't wait, espresso people, they do that, right? Like there's the several types of coffee, like real fancy coffees have like just pure milk at the top.
I believe so.
So
milk.
Next question.
Yeah.
You will often, but not always, have a Pilsner on the menu.
Yeah.
Now you've got the Pilsner machine.
You have nailed the problem that I saw as soon as I opened the box.
Now, I mean, are you only going to serve Pilsners through this device?
All right.
Or can you put other things through it as well?
Bobby Fleshman, I consider this the record. As in you're on the record right now.
On the record. Yeah. Okay. Let me say that we're not only going to continue to, as best we can, keep our Pilsner on tap now more than ever. We have a lot of production constraints because there are a lot of different styles that are keeping our tanks tied up. That said, now she's become more of a priority just by owning this faucet. But not only that, I woke up thinking about that we need to have a permanent Czech dark lager, which is something we've thought about for a while too. But now that we have two handles.
We did a collaboration with Lion's Tail Brewing down south in Neenah. And it was called the Threvo Pivo. Wait, it was
With
ABF
the beer
too.
factory,
Yeah, ABF, because I was like, it was the three of us. Appleton Beer Factory, Lion's Tail, and us made a dark Czech lager. And it was delicious.
Yeah, it's the two styles you get in the Czech Republic almost exclusively. They have,
they
have a pale lager too outside of their Pilsner.
So was this my subconscious way of getting the Threvo Pivo back on tap all the time? Yes.
I don't know, but so now it's exponentially complicated. How do we now not just keep up with one, but two Czech beers? So these are questions that we don't know yet, but we know as we grow, everything has to grow in step. So we're talking about tank additions, et cetera, to get there. The other thing, though, I wanted to mention is this is perfect for pouring Helles. Helles is in a lot of ways an echo of Czech Pilsner.
The Helles Lager, which is our Pirates
The Helles Lager. German Helles Lager is going to be a little less malty and a little less hoppy than a Czech Pilsner. A Czech Pilsner tends to be bigger in a couple of ways, and it's maybe a little more savory for that reason. But Helles drinks a little bit more crisp and light, and people tend to drink more of it depending on regional preference. So my point being is that Helles works there too. I think that we'll see that we'll be pouring that through the faucets a lot. Brewery in Denver, two breweries in Denver really, really inspired me to move forward on these Czech faucets. One is Bierstadt, and that's a name drop for the beer fans out there. That's where you want to go have probably the best Pilsner in the United States.
Second to ours.
And they make the best Helles in the United States. Potentially, like Allison says, second to ours. But every single faucet they have is a side pull. And it was just remarkable to see this place, as big as it is, as popular as it is, to run on three styles of beer. They had an amber, a Pilsner, and a Helles. Maybe they had one more, but that was incredible to see that. And the other brewery is Cohesion, and they do all open fermentation Czech beers in Denver, and they also run those through side pulls, and they only had 3 flavors as well. So when I saw that not only do people get behind this, but a brewery can hang their hat entirely on it, it really opened my eyes to what this could be. And I did see people buying all the different levels of foam and all this staff being well trained on how to pour them. So yeah, I've seen it in action. I know it can happen. Denver is a much bigger market than the Fox Valley, but it's okay. We can offer it as 5 or 10% of our menu, and we'll see what kind of following we'll garner.
But we are beer drinkers here, as they are too. But there's a reputation.
Oh yeah, I think I told you guys over text yesterday that I went to a Czech brewing talk, and it was in Denver actually, and that they started with bragging. The speaker bragged about how much beer they drink in the Czech Republic, and he showed the map of the world and everything. And then I let him give his talk, and I got up to ask a question. But before I did, I said, if the United States is broken up into countries and Wisconsin were a country, then the Czech Republic would be number 2. And that None of this is worth bragging about. This is what I told you guys, but still, it drew some laughs and set the tone. But anyway,
one time you were funny.
Yeah. I don't remember probably the terrible question was asked after that, but that was fine.
And so we get a lot of people who listen to this podcast who frequent this establishment.
Mm-hmm.
By the time this comes out, is this going to be available for people to get beer from?
She put the deadline as Monday. I have to install this. So that would be 2 days from where we record this.
So, yes.
So, yeah.
We're going to install it.
When they hear this, they're going to be able to come in and order a side-pulled Pilsner.
That's the plan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's my homework.
Luckily, we're closed on Labor Day, so that's when you're going to be doing this work.
I think the timing was because they were stumped on how to install it. They said, this is now Bobby's problem.
Oh, that's totally what happened. No, well, we're going to have to do some fancy installation and stuff, and I just got a headache, and I was like, F it. We're just going to, hey, Bobby, guess what? Open the box.
It's like giving that Christmas present to someone that takes a lot of, what is it called? Putting it together.
Yeah.
Assembly. Yeah.
DIY, my friend. DIY.
All right. Well, then that'll conclude this episode of Respecting the Beer. Make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player so you'll never miss an episode. And feel free to join the Facebook group to get updates between the episodes and support the show over on Patreon. Links to both of these are in the show notes. And until next time, please remember to respect the beer.